Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling to order this special meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the town of Oakville. And I appreciate very much your cooperation with conducting an orderly and considerate meeting of our town. We have three major items on our agenda tonight, and I'll speak about that in a second. But first we have to do a couple of housekeeping things. First is we have to ask if there are any regrets, and it's obvious there are no regrets. Everyone's here. And then I will inquire as to any declarations of pecuniary interest. Councillor Lapworth.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. As I declared at the previous meeting concerning Glen Abbey, I run an income tax business, and one of my clients is an employee of Glen Abbey and Clublink. So I will be declaring a declaration of pecuniary interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And will you then be leaving the meeting? Thank you. That's a best practice in matters of conflict. Now, Council, we need to resolve into Committee of the Whole, and I'll choose Councillor Dudek and Councillor Giddings, who seem to be first. All those in favor? And that is carried. We're now in Committee of the Whole. It's a style of meeting where our rules are somewhat relaxed in an effort to encourage participation by the public. And our job tonight as a council is to hear information from the public and the applicant and the staff, and to consider all of that information and eventually make a decision. Our job is not to debate with people, and I don't think any of us intend to do that. And our job is to take it in and consider it carefully and render a decision later. There are enough people registered who want to speak that I doubt that we'll finish tonight, and we have reserved tomorrow night, beginning at 6 o'clock, for the continuation of this meeting, if it does prove to be necessary. And tomorrow night, if it appears that another session is required to continue the meeting to its end, we'll make an announcement then as to when that will be. And with that, I'm going to turn now to the staff for their presentation of the public hearing item number 1. And our presenter is Kirk Bigger. And Council, you have a memo on this matter on your desk that makes a small change to one of the maps. And doubtless Mr. Bigger will give you more details on that. Ms. Closey, would you like to set things up?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you said, you have three major items in front of you tonight. The first two items are policy amendments into our Livable Oakville official plan, and both of those amendments are implementation components that come out of the studies that you had requested we undertake as part of the interim control bylaw. So those are the first two items on the agenda, and the third is, of course, the recommendation and public meeting report on the Glen Abbey. With your indulgence, what we'd like to do is provide some overall context on the policy documents from Mark Simeone, our Director of Planning, and then the presentations, and you'll deal, I'm assuming, with each item one after the other with delegations in your consideration. On the third item, what we'd like to do is again have Mark Simeone introduce the element with Paul Barrett providing the presentation on the third item. For the first is Kirk Bigger, who will give you the details following Mark Simeone, and Leslie Gilwoods for the cultural heritage.
Super, thanks.
Good evening, Mayor Burton. Members of council, those that are here, and also in our atrium. I know we have some residents in the atrium this evening. The agenda you have before you this evening is quite thick and heavy. There's a lot of reading, and so I thought I would take the time to give us a contextual piece to help us understand the importance of the items before you. When we think of the urban structure, we're asking ourselves the question, how do we want to grow, where do we want to go, and what do we want to protect as Oakville goes into the future? So this is a long-term vision of the community. It results from extensive conversations that the town has had with its citizens, through staff and through council members. And fundamentally, it will amend the Livable Oakville plan at the level of making amendments to the urban structure. And the Livable Oakville plan started in 06, was adopted in 09, and it really collectively represents a commitment of council and the community to a shared future. So in 100 years from now, the things that were important now should remain important then. And it also sets the tone for within which decisions can be made. How can this community accept change How can it decide how it wants to grow? And how can it decide on what it wants to protect? And so really, when you're listening to Mr. Bigger's presentation tonight, I want you to think about the importance of that in terms of what's before you this evening. It's an important tool, and it speaks to what the community has shared with us as to what's important to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simeone. Mr. Bigger, we're looking forward to your information.
There we go. Thank you, Mayor Burton, members of council, and we're excited to be here as well with this presentation and this decision this evening on the urban structure review. It's item number 1 in your agenda, and the next slide here is just showing a bit of an overview of the presentation tonight. It's not a very long presentation, although I expect there'll be some discussion or some questions, but really want to emphasize the importance of urban structure, to review again our process of public engagement and the comments that we've received, to look at our proposed urban structure and to put forward the recommendation to adopt the bylaws for the official plan amendments. So at a high level, the urban structure, we view it as a pattern of built and unbuilt areas, and it helps us establish where we can live, work, and play in a community. The Ontario land use policy system provides a clear direction for municipalities to establish an urban structure, and nodes and corridors are included as part of that. Urban structure is used to coordinate land use and infrastructure requirements and helps to establish a framework and a policy context for making planning decisions and certainty in the planning process. It's also a fundamental having an urban structure to achieve provincial interests and helps to guide public and private investment decisions. So again, working from the high level, the provincial level, it's important to have an urban structure in the context for growth management. We know that the Greater Golden Horseshoe is a very attractive and popular place for people to locate in terms of living and working and playing. And we have the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe that sets out where and how to grow. And through then the region's official plan and into the Livable Oakville plan and the North Oakville secondary plans here for the town of Oakville, it's how we establish that growth management pattern. The urban structure that we've developed through our urban structure review really is intended to accomplish 3 main areas: to protect natural heritage, open space and cultural heritage, to help to maintain the character of residential areas, and to direct growth to an identified system of nodes and corridors. So all of these work together, where to protect and where to grow, and where to maintain. With respect to the town of Oakville and the reason for urban structure and the importance here, council identified this review, the urban structure review, on February 1st, 2016, as a policy study required to review the town's urban structure and applicable policies in the official plan as part of our official plan review. We have 3 proposed town-initiated official plan amendments. You'll hear the term OPAs throughout the evening, to implement the results of this policy study. The OPAs essentially incorporate into the Livable Oakville plan some modifications to the text and schedules to provide for a town-wide urban structure. Council may recall that currently we have 2 official plans in North Oakville, the East and West secondary plans, and the Livable Oakville plan. And so these amendments are beginning to bring those official plan documents into one document, the Livable Oakville plan. So in corresponding to that, we have 2 official plan amendments, 2 bylaws to consider tonight that would align the North Oakville East and West secondary plans with the urban structure that's being proposed for the Livable Oakville plan. Just quickly on our public engagement process, as mentioned, the urban structure review is initiated February 16, 2016. In May 15 of 2017, the consultant hired to undertake the urban structure review completed and presented the urban structure directions from the study, and as well we began to preview the draft official plan amendments that would eventually be revised and polished up to be brought forward to this evening. May 30th, we held a public information meeting. That afternoon and evening sessions were well attended, and some new participants in our process came on board there, and we were able to work with them on their interests. June 12th, following that public information meeting, we hosted a statutory public meeting here before council, and that's when our draft official plan amendments were presented. Along the way, we've been receiving comments, both in written and in person, and we've been revising and polishing, as I said, and improving the amendments that are before you tonight. Just briefly, the responses to revisions. As a result of the input, a lot of input's been received, and I believe the report goes into quite amount of detail about that. One of the areas where we focused was on the relationship between an urban structure element and the land use designations, which are contained deeper in the official plan. One area where public comment received needed some explanation in that regard was up on the Bronte Road, and I'll just pull the map up here. The area I'm talking about in this part of our report in terms of an explanation was to help the property owner to understand the difference between an urban structure element and a land use designation for their properties. And so the properties in question were up on Bronte Road, and were the result of there was an Ontario Municipal Board hearing that established land use designations on those lands, and it, however, still remains, so there are development permissions on the land that will go into the land use schedules and the policies of the plan, but the in-force and effect plan for those lands is still the Parkway Belt West plan. And so on our urban structure review for those lands, we are going to keep showing that Parkway Belt West plan applying to these lands, and in the fullness of time, if and when that plan comes off those lands, then it'll show the underlying designations that have been approved through a board decision. So that was a situation where we were explaining how we treated the relationship between urban structure and land use designations. Another area along the way, as you may well appreciate, a lot of moving parts, and some of members of council and also the public have brought forward some very detailed analysis of the urban structure and how it relates to their lands or to their interests. And so there's been a process of revising and improving and adding clarity. You may recall also that in I believe June of this year, we had a new growth plan arrive. And so we had to address those new requirements as of July 1st in our work through the urban structure. So there's a process again of adding consistency and clarity and conformity, readability as well, and the use of terms to that official plan amendment. So another area where I'd like to just highlight where we undertook that process, and this is an area that's had a lot of interest on the way through the urban structure review. These lands here that I'm circling in the area of Upper Middle Road and 9th Line. And you'll see on the urban structure, they're accurately shown in terms of two classifications or two elements here. We have running through the center of the lands, a natural area designation in livable Oakville. And so that's reflected as the natural heritage system on our urban structure review. Adjacent to those valley lands are some table lands, and those table lands are not in the natural heritage system. They're not in the region's natural heritage system. They're not designated natural area in the livable Oakville plan. They are in fact designated private open space. And we have a lease, the town of Oakville has a lease over those lands for long-term recreational uses. So in keeping with the approach we've taken in other parts of town, where we have leases on public land, we've added these parkland components, or these private open space. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my mouse to come up here, but it's not. So we've added those two adjacent parcels to the parks, open space, and cemeteries element of the urban structure. And so previously we had some confusion perhaps around how the maps are being presented in terms of the colors and the color separation, and at times it was hard to distinguish one color from another. Here it's shown accurately in those two elements of the urban structure. So just moving on to more recent comments that we've been receiving, and you have a packet of comments attached to the staff report and appendix, and a lot of that content, all of that content has been addressed in the staff report, but there have also been other comments coming in over the last few days since the agenda was produced, and staff have been reviewing those comments, and actually we love comments because they're really helpful, and they help us again to make sure that our work is as accurate as it can be. So a couple of these comments that have come forward have triggered some revisions to the Schedule A1, which is this map you see before you, and is the subject of the memo that was circulated to revise the recommendation and to change the map that is attached to the staff report to the new map that's attached to the memo. And I'm just going to kind of, I have some text to describe. It's really the text out of the memo. I think it's probably easier to just show you on these two schedules where these changes have occurred in response to those comments that we've received. So going back to the September 12th version, which is dated up here in the corner, this is the one attached to your report, you will see in this area, the entire area is identified as natural heritage system, and over here as well, there's some other lands that are identified as natural heritage system. Those in fact are cemeteries, and they need to be reflected in the parks, open space, and cemeteries element of the urban structure. So this is the map that is attached to the memo, dated today, September 26th, and it's showing that these lands are actually in the cemetery element, as well as some lands over here. And that's consistent with across town and south of Dundas in the livable Oakville plan. Cemeteries are added to that element. A second revision that was made are to the urban structure elements over here in this area, again along Bronte Road, and as a result of that same Ontario Municipal Board process, there was a transfer of land between the region of Halton and the Bronte Green Corporation, and the lands through the board approval, the board decision, are actually have some development approval associated with them. So commercial, neighborhood commercial, and some housing. And currently on the September 12th version, it's shown as Parkway Belt West Plan, which is not entirely correct. In fact, those lands are actually out of the Parkway Belt West Plan and should be showing on the urban structure as residential areas. And similar to that discussion around the relationship between urban structure and land use designations, on the corresponding land use schedule for these lands, which is Schedule H, you will see the permissions for urban development there. So those are the two revisions that are the subject of the memo and are detailed on this slide, which I don't need to dwell on. But those comments were coming in yesterday, I believe, and a little bit towards the end of last week. We were able to respond to those. There have been other comments received as early as this afternoon or as late as this afternoon, and staff are confident that those comments have been addressed in one form or another in the staff report that's before you this evening. So we have been reviewing those comments as they've come in. The approach really throughout the work is to be consistent with the applicable provincial and regional policies or stricter. So that's been our approach from the beginning. So just a quick overview of the amendments before you, which are attached as bylaws to the report. There are 3 bylaws, 3 official plan amendments. Official plan amendment number 1 is bylaw 2017-079, and that is to the livable Oakville plan. And essentially what that aims to do is to introduce Section 3, urban structure, which is really a guidebook to what the elements are and what they're intending to do in terms of the development of policy and guiding growth management and protection and maintenance of important features throughout the town. So Section 3 gives you a text-based overview of those major elements of the urban structure. The next addition through this official plan amendment is a new Schedule A1 urban structure. It corresponds to the text description in the Section 3 that's provided. And then finally, we are adding Part F to Part F implementation, a section that's designed to protect the town's urban structure, to assist in doing so, and to establish criteria for when and how an urban structure review could be undertaken and how changes might occur to that urban structure. And also how to evaluate impacts of applications to that urban structure. It's important to keep in mind that our work has been reviewed by the region of Halton as conforming with the new growth plan 2017, as well to conforming with the region's official plan. And part of our approach has been to really take all of these pieces of urban structure that already exist in our policy and bring them all into one place, which is our Section 3 and our A1 schedule. So the next two draft amendments deal with the North Oakville East and West secondary plans. Their bylaws 2017-080 and 081. And they're essentially the same. And what they do is they say that there's a townwide urban structure. If you want to look at that urban structure, you go to the Livable Oakville plan and you read that urban structure. And if there is a conflict between the North Oakville plans and the urban structure, then the North Oakville plans prevail. So that's really a step towards bringing these plans into the Livable Oakville plan, but not really making significant changes. So final slide this evening is the recommendation. And so we are asking that the town-initiated official plan amendments we're recommending, that these be approved. That bylaw 2017-079 be passed as revised by the memo. That bylaw 2017-080 and 081 be passed. And that notice of council's decision reflects that the comments from the public have been appropriately addressed. And that's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger. Council, any questions for Mr. Bigger? Councillor Elger?
Thank you very much for the presentation. One question I have is the land east of Bronte, the sliver that the region flipped to Bronte Green, has it been taken out of the parkway built by the minister at this point?
Yes. The land that was transferred to Bronte Green Corporation was removed from the Parkway Belt West plan through an amendment to that plan. I believe it's 196 from the year 2012. And so all of those lands, including the operations yard, which is being transferred, but also the former police facility, the parking lots, the regional administrative center, they've already actually been removed from the Parkway Belt West plan.
Okay, so it was a mapping error then previously that we had.
The Parkway Belt West plan, we have let's say not exactly an error, but that we're catching up with those amendments to the Parkway Belt West plan through this official plan review. And so we intend to apply underlying designations to those lands that have been removed, and then to reflect that in our OP by taking the Parkway Belt West plan off, where they have actually come out of that plan.
Okay, and that was done in 2012, you said?
2012, yes.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Welcome.
Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bigger. I know you had mentioned some of the provincial policy changes that seem to be coming out rather quickly. Are you satisfied with the changes that we've made in the urban structure review now, that we're up to date with what the province has told us we need to do at this point?
So through you, Mr. Chair, there are a number of conformity matters to be addressed yet through our official plan review, but we are satisfied that this work and these amendments are in conformity with the growth plan. Through our official plan review, we will be addressing conformity and consistency with the provincial policy statement and the region's official plan. We'll be going through all of those in greater detail.
Councillor Adams?
I wonder if our staff could give a little bit more of the background and history of the lands at Ninth Line and Upper Middle around the Parkway and how they were treated previously, particularly on the west side, I'll say, of the creek area.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you're referring to the lands that I highlighted in my discussion around how we were clarifying mapping?
That's right. So could you give some of the older history of that set of land? And how it was treated by the region and by us?
Okay, I'll try. And the lands are owned by Infrastructure Ontario. We at the town of Oakville have a lease over those lands. The entire property is under lease to us for recreational purposes. and that lease, it's a long-term lease with a possibility of renewal. Those lands within the regional official plan, the entire parcel is, it's reflected in two land use categories or designations. The area that I referred to earlier, the valley lands, are found within the regional natural heritage system. The lands adjacent, the tablelands, are identified as urban in the regional official plan. They are also identified in the regional official plan as within the employment overlay. And so that's the view, the vision of those lands within the region's official plan. Locally, we have identified, as previously described, in conjunction with the natural heritage system of the region, we apply the natural area designation to those valley lands. That's our land use designation in the Livable Oakville plan for the natural heritage system or the natural area. And then adjacent to that, in the Livable Oakville plan, they're identified as private open space. And we have, in the urban structure, shown the valley lands as natural heritage system, and the tablelands that are identified as private open space, we're showing those as parks, open space, and cemeteries, that element of the urban structure. So that's kind of the land use story on those lands, if that helps to answer the question.
That does, and my last sort of follow-up question is on the regional employment overlay. Is it correct that the region is intending to remove the employment overlay?
No, I don't believe that that's correct, Councillor. The region's employment overlay is being reviewed through their regional official plan review. And as part of our official plan review, you may recall from some other items, the employment commercial study that we've done here. Prior to Growth Plan 2017 coming, the idea of converting employment lands was a power granted to the local municipality. Now that power is elevated to the region. And so for us to amend employment lands or to convert employment lands, we need to go through a regional municipal comprehensive review. So what this work and what the employment commercial work is doing is to provide direction from this council to that official plan review about how those matters should be dealt with respect to the employment overlay, for example.
Okay, perhaps I'm jumping the gun, but this is leading towards that. This is leading towards the removal of these lands from the employment overlay. As a possible outcome.
Yeah, I believe, I don't know if is that a recommendation that we have made to, perhaps Ms. Childs could supplement that, please.
Through your worship to Councillor Adams, through the development of our urban structure, we would recommend that it not to be included as part of the employment lands for the town or for the region.
Right, thank you very much.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Bigger, for your presentation. Question, you went over very briefly, and I just want to make sure we're very clear with respect to when you're talking about urban structure elements versus land designation, land use designations. There seems to be some confusion when this comes about that the land is going to be exact for this purpose. So could you clarify that and make that very clear to the audience what that is? Thank you.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. So we have said previously and tonight that the urban structure review is a consolidation, if you will, of all these various elements across the town and elevating them up to an importance of an urban structure. What appears on this schedule hasn't fundamentally changed permissions that run with the land use designations and policies that exist in the official plan for properties identified. So you have a property today, and if this is adopted, it means you could still do tomorrow what you could do today. There are some areas that perhaps I could highlight, though, where we are intending to undertake further study. And this is one area that has caused I'll say concern, or I don't want to say confusion necessarily, but it was back to that explanation about the role of an element of the urban structure versus a land use designation. We recognize nodes and corridors in this urban structure, and we recognize, for example, Bronte Go Station as a node, and that's required by places to grow in provincial policy. We don't have a plan for Bronte GO Station. We intend to go and study that area. We intend to delineate the properties that would be part of a major transit station area at Bronte GO, and then to develop appropriate policies and designations for managing growth and change in that area. So that is identified as a noding corridor for further study. And that same icon or that same hatching pattern is applied in other locations, and that means the same thing there. We're going to go and undertake further study and clarify land use policies and designations and lands that would be in a delineated area to accommodate further growth or intensification in those locations.
Thank you, Council. Madam Clerk, would you call the first listed delegation?
The first delegation speaking to item 1 is John Shield.
Welcome, Mr. Shield. Council looks forward to your information.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I wonder if we could, Mr. Bigger, just leave that up there, because it's going to help me a lot. I'm here sort of prematurely. I would have a serious presentation, but I don't have all the information yet because Oakville hasn't given it to me. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what I know now. I wrote a children's book called Crossy's Pond, innocent, right? And it's about, in that area that you just finished talking about, the Parkway and the stormwater settling pond that Tom Adams knows very well, and you've helped a lot with your questions. That's an engineering thing where all the stormwater ends up being in there and the sand and various things like that settle out, and then clearer water goes into Joshua's Creek and it goes toward Lake Ontario. So I've walked dogs around there for about 8 years. There are animals there, more animals than probably the Toronto Zoo has. And if you took an average person today with their cell phone, they wouldn't know what was going on. So I thought, let's do this, okay? So if anything happens out of what I'm doing here tonight, it's my dog's fault or credit. Bayshire Pond is a Garden of Eden, right in the middle of an urban sprawl like we have here. It's beautiful. The water's dirty, it's beautiful. Livable Oakville, okay, that's people. I think it's forgotten animals, and I've seen enough examples of where Oakville has intruded into the animals in this pond. The Parkway and the pond are the two things that I want to talk about. So there are these stormwater settling ponds north of Upper Middle Road, and there are lots of them. Some of them are Gardens of Eden, some of them aren't. I'm an engineer.
Shield,
pardon?
I hear you say you want to talk about the pond and the animals, but I'm wondering, are you here to talk about the amendment that's before us?
Yeah, well, I was told it fits in, and whoever did that has read what I've submitted. I'm just giving you a little background as to why I'm here. Well, you're using my time right now. You know, so please.
Well, I would take the view that you're using council's time, and it's my job to make sure that you're using it on topic.
You'll be so satisfied when I finished, you have no idea.
Thank you.
Okay? I'm not going to go into the handouts that I gave you. I gave you a lot just so you'd have some background, okay? And I know the public here doesn't have them because there's a lot of issues. That area that's called the Parkway again, when we looked at the owls or the wildlife in Oakville report, it looked at every green space in Oakville but that one. It didn't look at it. There are more animals and birds and things there than anywhere else, but it left it out. I don't know why. Big mystery. Ministry of Natural Resources has no reach into stormwater settling ponds, but the public keeps asking them, what do we do? Because we're killing all the animals every time we go in there and do something with them. Oakville's stormwater management procedures, and again, this relates to urban and growth and all of those things, don't talk about wildlife. They're pure cold engineering textbooks. Those engineers had no heart. I'm a chemical engineer, I have a heart, okay? So total lack of wildlife concerns when it comes to any of the engineering, parks and rec, this and that, whatever goes on. And I guess this relates also to Glen Abbey because that's part of a corridor of wildlife. 16 Mile Creek is a big corridor for wildlife. If you look at the thing on the right-hand side, if you take out the Parkway, you end up with a whole bunch of things that the wildlife study said were not contiguous green spaces because it didn't look at the Parkway. If you put the Parkway back into the equation, everything works, okay? The Bayshire Pond project that we've got going on right now ended up draining the pond against some M&R recommendations. There were 4 big turtles in that pond that kids had names for. 3 of them we believe are dead. 1 was rescued by the Humane Society, despite warnings ahead of time. So there's the zoning issues of the parkway. You've maybe cleared up some of those just now, and we have those funny triangular areas in the top right and the bottom left. But I'm going to get into those, and then you're going to understand exactly why I'm here. Just this past week, just so you know how important the parkway is to Oakville and everybody, a friend of mine discovered about 50 dump loads of waste material from a building site dumped right into the middle of the parkway. Part of the reason for that is because the path that we used to follow to go through there was blocked because of some project that they were doing on the pond. But nevertheless, now we have a massive dumping problem in this area, which is supposed to be green space. So what do? We have to give special status to some of these ponds, settling ponds. We want M&R or someone like that involved to oversee some of the work, because it certainly wasn't happening in what was going on in the one that we're talking about here. The whole parkway should be declared as natural zone. The whole thing. Like, forget those triangles on the side. Okay? Because the one on the bottom side impedes with what happens to Iroquois Shores Woods. And the animals cross that road there, believe it or not. But if you put things there, it won't work that way. So the parkway is the actual hub to tie in that whole green area on the right-hand side of Oakville, just like 16 Mile Creek in the middle. Take it away and do funny things with zoning, you're going to kill it. So no development of any kind in the parkway, and I'm telling you that right now, and we're going to keep coming back until we get that one way or another. What do we get? We're going to get wildlife security, sustainability, and their range assured. We're going to get a buffer to development on the other side of 9th Line, because Infrastructure Ontario is going crazy with industrial and commercial development just on the other side of 9th Line. If you take that away, we're going to be abused. So, now, I only got this today, okay, so I want to talk to you. I don't know, I had this slide thing here, but it's gone now, so I can't do this. I couldn't get this copied for anybody because it happened around 5 o'clock with a courier from Infrastructure Ontario. That parkway is always a rectangular area, the way you show it, correct? Oh, I can do this? Okay. So that's the parkway, that yellow thing that everybody calls the parkway. But Oakville has a way of calling the parkway a rectangle, okay? I can't focus that, I'm sorry. So that upper left-hand corner that's white is owned by Oakville, and it's the old 9th Line industrial dump from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. No one in Oakville has ever told me that, despite me asking for months, okay? That dump is either leased to or subleased to the rugby club, or part of it is, or they play on it, or it certainly leaches into lands that everybody's involved with. Infrastructure Ontario is giving me these things because they're concerned, because we have a health and safety issue with regard to the old Oakville dump up there. No one ever talks about it, okay? The bottom of that parkway, and the part that I've got there on the right-hand side, Mystery Dump Site, that's another dump site. And those dump sites are in the areas that you have zoned as, you know, O2 or whatever it was when I walked in here. Can't do anything with dumps. You can't build a school on a dump, it doesn't work. You don't, if you don't know they're there, you better find out, okay? So, got 2 minutes left. I've got nothing but obfuscation, I guess that's the word, like when it comes to trying to deal with the town to understand exactly what is in the parkway and who owns what, okay? There are 3 owners, if the whole rectangle is that. Upper right-hand corner, Oakville Dump. The stormwater pond, Oakville, they bought that from Infrastructure Ontario for $225,000. Infrastructure Ontario bought the whole thing in 1976 from a developer in Toronto. Why the developer walked away, I have no idea, but I suspect the land may have some problems. What's the best use for that? Animals, natural zone, monitoring the dumps, which we don't really do right now. Every 5 years, maybe, Oakville has halt and test them. They don't talk about them. So there's misinformation on the maps on the Oakville website, because it's always, that white part up there isn't in. It's a rectangular green area, you know, so I'm concerned. The sublet to rugby is probably a direct let, because Oakville owns part of whatever they're letting to somebody. There's a lot of intrigue, and I can tell you that developers right now are looking at properties like this because there's nothing left for them to develop. They want to build houses on top of dumps, and it's happening in Ontario. London, Ontario's had 2 houses explode because of natural gas in the last 10 years or so. So the only solution is to come clean, okay? Tell everybody what's where does it lie, what's going on here, who owns what. Get somebody that knows animals. I'm going to give you this. I'm no expert, okay, but my dog is. And what it is it's probably the best example of what kind of wildlife we have here. M&R is not allowed on the property because it's private. They're not allowed to go. It's called secondary crown land because it was owned by somebody before. They can only go up to Moosonee or somewhere to look at stuff. And ministries of the Ontario government are excised from looking at that property. They can't do anything with it. And there are 3 parties involved: Oakville, Halton, Infrastructure Ontario, maybe environment. And I'm asking here tonight that you guys get together, talk about this. You understand it, Mr. Bigger, very, very well as to what's going on, and I guess some of the questions with regard to industrialization and so on and so on. Put them all in the bag and see what comes out. But the only answer is natural zone. Okay? I hope I've helped. That's it.
Thank you. I worry that you misunderstood what you might have heard. There is no intention of allowing construction on any of these lands. There is only a requirement here that we correct the record as to how they are owned and held and designated. And Ms. Childs explained that our position with the region is to remove even the employment overlay.
Okay.
So I hope that gives you some assurance. In response to some of your other submissions, the town manager would like to speak.
But may I just answer to that? You asked me a question. I thought I could answer.
I did not ask you a question.
Well, I thought it was.
I'm sorry, I didn't. I tried to reassure you that there's no construction or development intended on the land.
One sentence. When I came here tonight, I did not know this. Just understand that. It was 02 when I walked in here.
Same remark applies even to 02. But, you know, thank you. If you would like to linger a minute, the town manager would like to offer some additional information.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and to the members of council. The landfill site, the former landfill site that was referred to as being up in the northeast corner adjacent to the rugby club, we've been monitoring through the regional Halton, who has worked for us under contract since 1997, do annual testing up there with the results being sent to the town of Oakville as well as M&R. That is a very old landfill. We've been aware of it, certainly I've been aware of it for my entire 41 and a half years here. And the area to the south, which was labeled as a mystery dump, that was actually an area that was operated by Bott Construction as part of the construction of the 403. The province allowed Bott Construction to actually raise the level of that land, and I suspect that was around 1980. And there is material that was brought in there, but that was all done at the same time as the big piles that were down by the PGA Golf Center on the 9th line. All of that fill came off of the 403 project, which was a provincial project at the time, and the contractor was Bott, working under contract for the province. So that's the mystery solved on that landfill.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you call Councillor Adams?
Could I just ask our staff to clarify one thing about the use of the natural designation versus the park's open space designation on the rugby lands? If that was under a natural designation, would the rugby club be allowed to continue its operations or modify its operations? Would we expect a rugby club to be operating in the natural zone?
No, through you, Mayor Burton, members of council, typically a natural area designation is applied to environmental features and buffers and linkages, and it's intended to protect the environment. So we wouldn't traditionally include active sports facilities in those types of locations.
Thank you.
All right then, Madam Clerk, the next delegation on item 1.
The next delegation speaking to item 1 is Carol Deeth or Robert Barbers from the Clearview Oakville Community Alliance.
Point of clarification, we were told we were speaking out of number 2.
We
Okay.
apologize for the error. Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you like to try again?
I will try again. Speaking to item 1 is Dan Carruthers.
Mr. Carruthers, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you very much. Your Honor, members of council and town staff, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Dan Carruthers, and I've been in Oakville for some 30-odd years. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and 72 other owners in our small community on Dorval Drive. In those 30-odd years, I've seen the city grow from 70,000 people to whatever it is today, pretty much triple that. I think, we're not against development. In fact, our own little community is a benefit of the development that has happened. Growth is a fact of life. It's helped the town bring in, new economic opportunities, and it's provided the space for people to live. It's just that as citizens, we're concerned that growth without a plan is an issue, and we want to make sure that it's well thought out and presents itself for the future. Without a solid roadmap going forward, we get chaotic development. Many issues arising from unsupported development of infrastructure and resources. And this is what can happen if we have development on a project-by-project basis. I'm not an urban planner by any means. I have, however, followed the livable Oakville and urban structure development with interest, particularly as of late. It was developed in the right way with input from people in the community and with other resources. And I've read all the recent stuff, and I think I understand it, and I think I understand it better tonight. So my point tonight here is to say that as an individual and as a representative of those 72 other people, we would want to make sure that council moves forward by supporting the amendments to the livable Oakville plan that are presented. We think it's a very important document. It provides a future growth for us. It protects what we have today, and it protects the integrity of the city today. So I'm here asking, if not demanding, that council move forward, take these amendments which provide clarity to the growth and support what's going on. So that's my point. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers, for your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Next delegation speaking to item 1 is Doug McCurkin from Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association.
Welcome, Mr. McCurgan. Council's interested in your information.
Thank you. Like our colleagues from Clearview, I thought I was going to be speaking to item 2, but in fact I had registered to delegate on all 3 of the first 3 items. So my name is Doug McCurgan. I'm here representing the Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association, and we wish to record our support for this recommendation from staff. I have read much of the urban structure review. I can't say that I've digested all of it, but I certainly understand the principal arguments and the principal recommendations, and as do my colleagues in TCRA, my fellow directors. So we support staff's recommendations for the amendments resulting from the urban structure review. And for what it's worth, we also support the recommendations with respect to the second item on the agenda and the third item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCurgan. I have no idea which microphone's going to work now, but do you want to turn it? Is it on? Okay, I guess it's on now. On the off chance, oh, all right, that's a big microphone. Mr. McCurgan, thank you very much for your information. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation speaking to item 1 is Janet Haslett-Thiel from Joshua Creek Residents Association and Chartwell Maple Grove Residents Association.
Welcome. Council is looking forward to your information. Right, don't use that.
I have my copies that are required to give to council. Mayor Burton, town and regional councillors, as you know, my name is Janet Haslett-Thiel. I'm pleased to delegate on behalf of Joshua Creek Residents Association, as well as the Chartwell Maple Grove Residents Association. Rick Snidel is here on behalf of CMGRA. That's one delegation you can take off the list. We are united in our comments. We are delegating in regards to the urban structure, cultural heritage, and Glen Abbey recommendation reports. Tonight, we are here to support all 3 of the town staff's recommendations. The quality of the reports are exemplary and demonstrate thoughtful consideration of the issues that must be assessed and balanced in the management of growth for our town. We acknowledge and appreciate the extensive time and effort spent by the town staff, including important community consultations, to arrive at these recommendations. The foundation of these reports is Livable Oakville, which was the result of careful thought, analysis, and community consultation. The guiding principles in Livable Oakville provide assurances to residents that our community and neighborhoods will be developed with regard for, and I quote, preserving and creating a livable community in order to preserve, enhance, and protect the distinct character, cultural heritage, living environment, and sense of community of neighborhoods, unquote. That principle alone speaks volumes about our expectations of what Livable Oakville, and by its extension, Town Council, must uphold when making decisions regarding development applications. Club Link's application is not consistent with this guiding principle. As you know, Livable Oakville Plan appropriately identifies growth nodes, making it clear where we will grow to be in compliance with provincial and regional mandates while achieving the vision for Oakville. From a resident perspective, Livable Oakville provides important protection for stable residential neighborhoods, an issue in which JCRA and CMJRA are very passionate. It does this by directing development where intensification is supported by long-term investments in infrastructure, including transit, and by expressly emphasizing the importance of respecting the character of each neighborhood. So why are we supportive of the Urban Structure Report? The Urban Structure Report is consistent with the spirit and intent of Livable Oakville. In particular, the recommendations to include the following in the Urban Structure Plan are exactly what residents expect of development applications. And it's a lengthy quote, but I think it's important. 28.23 says, submissions must demonstrate that the proposed amendment is A, consistent with the town's mission and guiding principles, B, does not undermine the town's urban structure in terms of 1, directing growth to identified nodes and corridors, and ensuring their timely development in a manner that makes effective and efficient use of existing and planned investment and achieves the planned objectives for those areas. 2, protecting natural heritage systems. 3, protecting waterfront open space, parks and other public open space. 4, conserving cultural heritage resources. And 5, the maintenance of the character of established residential residential areas, employment areas, and major commercial areas, and it goes on. It is an excellent addition and should be added to Livable Oakville. For us, the facts speak for themselves. The Glen Abbey Golf Course was not identified as a growth node when Livable Oakville was agreed to, nor is it zoned for residential development. The location of the Abbey and its poor connections to main arterial roads would result in greater levels of intensification that are not planned for, and it would significantly diminish the quality of the community that residents deserve. The application, if approved, would require channeling financial resources away from the other growth nodes, which have already been agreed to and planned for. The magnitude of the province, Halton, and town's investments in these already approved growth areas is because they all support where the growth is targeted. It is neither right nor appropriate to allow the proposed development at the Glen Abbey Golf Course to occur. The urban structure review also shows that Halton Region confirms that, quote, the creation of new growth areas is not necessary to accommodate estimates of forecasted growth, unquote. Therefore, we do not see a basis for the application to be granted. In regards to cultural heritage, we applaud the changes in respect to protecting cultural heritage resources, and in particular, the town's adherence to the following direction within the provincial growth plan. Quote, as the GGH grows and changes, we must continue to value what makes this region unique to ensure the sustained prosperity of Ontario, its people, and future generations. While growth is an important part of vibrant, diversified urban and rural communities and economies, the magnitude of growth that is expected over the coming decades for the GGH presents several challenges. Urban sprawl can degrade the region's air quality, water resources, natural heritage resources such as rivers, lakes, woodlands, and wetlands, and cultural heritage resources. Our cultural heritage resources and open spaces in our cities, towns, and countryside will provide people with a sense of place. And it goes on and has some magnificent wording that whoever wrote this part of the provincial growth plan should be applauded for. It concludes in that quote by saying these valuable assets must be wisely protected and managed as part of planning for future growth. Accommodating growth can put pressure on these resources through development and site alterations. It is necessary to plan in a way that protects and maximizes the benefits of these resources that makes our communities unique and attractive places to live, unquote. Well, we have a plan, and it's livable Oakville. So we support the urban structure recommendation and the cultural heritage recommendation as proposed by the town staff because they further frame the blueprint for growth in Oakville and are consistent with the vision of its residents. The town staff's Glen Abbey report fairly assesses the application and considers what is expressed in approved planning documents. We concur with the recommendation to deny the application. We look to Town Council to make it clear by denying the application that development must comply with livable Oakville, the expressed words, the spirit, and intent. To Club Link. We are very appreciative and respectful of your operation of a world-class golf course in our community. It is part of the fabric of our history, and it contributes on many levels to our town. We hope you choose to remain a part of it for years to come. Thank you for your time this evening, and I will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Hazlett-Thiel, for your information. Are there questions? Thank you, ma'am. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation speaking to item 1 is Fraser Demoff.
Welcome, Mr. Demoff. Council looks forward to your information.
I'd like to thank Mayor and Council for allowing me to speak this evening. I'm here both as Executive Director of Cycle Oakville as well as one of the spokespersons for the Save Glen Abbey Coalition. And we wanted to come here tonight to voice our support for the staff recommendations around the Glen Abbey Golf Course. To start, the urban structure review and indeed the Livable Oakville plan outline key areas of Oakville where development is both needed and desired. And the map or schedule, Schedule 1A, I think was shown earlier, it shows really clearly that Glen Abbey, if developed, does not fit into the Livable Oakville plan in any way, shape, or form. I live currently in Kerr Village, which is the closest designated growth area to the Glen Abbey Golf Course, and I have serious concerns about Glen Abbey if it was to become Oakville's new growth area. When I look at Oakville's designated growth areas, I look at them with a lens of active transportation and the immense potential that exists in each of these growth areas. We in the cycling community work hard to ensure that when this mayor and council plan for these different areas, that Oakville residents that choose to live there have an option to walk, ride a bike, take Oakville Transit, instead of solely relying on a car. When looking at the Glen Abbey golf course proposed development, it's painfully clear that the only option people would have if they were to live in this community would be to drive a car. We already struggle across the town to provide all of these options, but the town is at least working on it. If this development goes forward, it would significantly alter the Livable Oakville plan and the resources and tax dollars that have already been planned for in our other growth areas. This would mean that key priorities around active transportation would have to be pushed out in order to meet the needs of this new unplanned growth area. Plain and simple, and to echo some of the staff's comments, this is not an appropriate area for a new designated growth area. And if developed, this area would not afford those living there with a safe option to either ride a bike or walk to destinations. And it's important that we stick to the Livable Oakville plan that was developed over years of engagement. The thousands of residents in this would-be growth area would literally have one single unprotected bike lane to get them in and out of that community. And for a community full of 10,000 people, which is likely the number that would live there, it's just a crazy planning thing that they would even try and do that. And as someone that participated, as I mentioned, in the stakeholder engagement of the Livable Oakville plan, I strongly believe and echo town staff when I say that the building of our major growth areas and the planning of these areas should be driven by our local government, our mayor and council, and not by the whims of any single private landowner. And it is with all of this in mind that I strongly support staff recommendations in regards to all three agenda items tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Demoff, for your information. Questions? Thank you, sir. The next delegation, please, Madam Clerk. Councillor Elger.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure we do the process properly here. And I noticed we did the presentation for item 1, and I'm concerned maybe residents may be speaking to item 2 and 3. And I just want to make sure we do it properly. If you can give us some direction.
The residents have made clear when they're speaking, if they're speaking to item 1 or to all 3 items. And those who were not going to speak to item 1 at all in their remarks, such as Mr. Bravers, have stood down until we get there.
Okay, I just thought that since we had item 1 presented, we haven't had 2 and 3 yet. I just wanted to make sure that.
I understand, and
that's fine.
We're not in a position to, I mean, I think we've made it clear how we would like them to present. They've chosen to present the way they've chosen, okay. And I think we just have to take notes and keep it in mind.
That's fine, okay.
The next delegation, please.
The next delegation speaking to item 1 is Karen Brock from Oakville Green.
Welcome, Ms. Brock.
Thought I had a little more time here.
We're looking forward to your information.
Good evening. My name is Karen Brock, and I'm speaking on behalf of Oakville Green Conservation Association, representing citizens from all across Oakville. Oakville Green is a not-for-profit residents association who have an 18-year history of preserving, restoring, and enhancing green spaces on both public and private property. Oakville Green is aligned with environmental defense, and if you don't know who they are, it's their mission to challenge and inspire change in government, business, and people to ensure a greener, healthier, and prosperous life for all. Environmental Defense has a well-documented report called The High Costs of Sprawl, Why Building More Sustainable Communities Will Save Us Time and Money. Written in 2013, it's even more pertinent 4 years later. We feel it summarizes perfectly the input from our members and the issues we face as a growing urban community. It highlights key reasons for changing how we grow, but 3 of particular relevance right here and now, and they were mentioned by staff. And I quote, "The Greater Golden Horseshoe is on the path to becoming a great urban region. In order to secure the best outcomes for the region's current and future residents, they recommend the following: show the true costs of sprawl, and I know the region has something to say about this. Development charges must reflect the true costs of servicing new communities. Number 2, get people moving. Residents and businesses need to urge the government to invest in transportation infrastructure. We're starting to see some of that money come through. And the reason for this is to move people and goods quickly. And number 3, encourage the right kind of developments in the right places. We learned that urban sprawl doesn't work. Kickstart development of complete communities on existing rapid transit lines, end the pattern of building car-dependent communities, and discourage development in green fields, namely Glen Abbey, which are difficult to service. In the early 2000s, the high economic, social, and environmental costs of sprawl became too much for the region to ignore. New laws were introduced, and you heard staff present those tonight. And we're starting to see some results, especially in the policies. Gradually, some of our existing neighborhoods are becoming complete communities capable of supporting local businesses and a variety of transportation options. Many newer communities are being built having learned from our mistakes of the past. So here we are tonight. Our town and region have a clear vision, and Oakville Green expects and hopes that this will be upheld, and you have full reason to uphold it. We've got to stay on the path to more sustainable and livable communities. We're aggressively improving the regional transportation system of almost 9 million people, and we're going to have to incorporate 4.4 million more expected to arrive. But we're doing these things to see countryside and green space protected from wasteful land practices, i.e. urban sprawl. And the investments and changes we make today help our communities grow and thrive in sustainable, diverse, and healthy ways for years to come. Our province, through their policies, our region, our municipality, the town of Oakville, and the citizens of Oakville have created a solid, integrated plan over the past 10 years to create the type of community that we want to live in. We cannot be more aligned. ClubLink's development of Glen Abbey does not fall into any of these plans. I encourage Council to have the determination and resourcefulness to stick with the plan and decline this development application. Oakville Green would like to acknowledge the detailed, comprehensive work of our planning staff, thank you, and their diligence in adhering to regional and provincial planning and thinking about what is best for its citizens, Oakville citizens. By incorporating up-to-date planning principles, our community will not repeat the past mistakes of urban sprawl that have cost us dearly. Oakville Green would like to acknowledge in particular planning staff and council's consultation process with its citizens. Without a doubt, it's been very thorough. And Oakville Green would like to support all 3 of the recommendations. Firstly, the urban structure review. We're satisfied that the town has worked to provide a framework for how the town will accommodate required growth to 2041. And all the things that staff mentioned, natural heritage, the character of residential areas, and directing growth to the nodes and the corridors, as other speakers have mentioned tonight. We support the cultural heritage policy updates, and for all the reasons, as I've said, the provincial policy statements, it conforms with the 2017 growth plan. It conforms to the Region of Halton official plan. It is in conformity with the proposed urban structure OPA, which is to be approved tonight. Oakville Green is in agreement that the proposed OPA supports the implementation of the Ontario Heritage Act. Glen Abbey is unique, and the town has proven this without a doubt. Finally, regarding the 3rd agenda item, the development applications, Oakville Green is in full agreement with the comprehensive work of town staff and concur that Glen Abbey Golf Course is not an appropriate location for a new node or corridor and does not uphold the town's urban structure. Also, the proposed removal of the Glen Abbey Golf Course would not preserve and enhance and protect the distinct character, cultural heritage, living environment, and sense of community of neighborhoods, which is the guiding principle of the Living Oakville Plan. Also, Oakville Green supports the findings that there are deficiencies found in the various reports, and peer review did not, that they did not fully demonstrate conformity with all of the provincial, regional, or local practices. Oakville Green supports the staff recommendation of refusal of the official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw, and plan of subdivision applications by ClubLink based on the review and analyses provided. The town has worked pretty hard to ensure that the policy framework reflected in the town's urban structure is maintained. And really want to speak to two fundamental considerations, and I think they were mentioned by head of planning, that really it's about protecting what is valuable, cultural heritage resources. We've proved that already. And also about where and how to grow the urban structure. That's key. We are confident that Halton Region and the town, working in a coordinated, integrated manner, all for a common goal, are going to bat for our citizens, fulfilling their social contract to those who choose Oakville as their home, while at the same time meeting the province's planning requirements. Oakville Green has peace of mind knowing that the town has acted in good faith with high regard to consultations and conversations that it has had with its citizens. Since 2004, Oakville Green and its volunteers have planted over 22,000 trees and shrubs on public property. We do so knowing full well that we will not immediately benefit from their maximum contribution to our community. I'm now in my 60s and will never see the 4,000 trees that Oakville Green plants this year. But I won't see them grow to maturity. I won't be able to sit in their shade. But I plant them in consideration of our children and our grandchildren, in hopes of creating a better and more sustainable world for them. And I think that's where we're coming from tonight. I think this is why we have to make a change. This is why it's so important. We're at a turning point. Once a green space is developed, it is never undone. It's gone. By declining this development application, we believe the town and council will be looking forward and respecting our First Nations people's 7-generation principle that recognizes that the choices we make today will affect our descendants 7 generations into the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your information. Are there questions for the delegation? Thank you, Ms. Brock.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation speaking to item 1 is Bob Laughlin from Oakville Lakeside Residents Association.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Laughlin, welcome. Council is looking forward to your information. And before you begin, I have a special announcement for those residents who are watching us from the atrium in the south part of the building. If there are members of the audience there who are interested to delegate on item number 1, it would be a good time to make your way to the chamber now. Mr. Laughlin, thank you very much, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
My name is Bob Laughlin. I do represent the Oakville Lakeside Residents Association. We support all the recommendations made by staff in their 2 reports on suggested changes to the urban structure and cultural heritage. We would also like to congratulate the staff and thank them for producing such logical and thoughtful documents. The Urban Structure Report, which sets out townwide where and how Oakville would like to see growth to maintain the type of town that Oakville should be in 100 years. I appreciate that. I would hope that my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren will be able to enjoy the town like I have for the last 50 years. The Cultural Heritage recommendation adds to providing better protection of those areas throughout the town that are important parts of our cultural heritage through amendments to the Livable Oakville Plan. What I liked about the Cultural Heritage report was a subtle shift toward recognizing green space and landscape as being equally important to buildings in terms of preserving our cultural heritage. If Council tonight will adopt both of these reports and approve them and pass the bylaws that are set out, the town puts in place a town-wide framework from which to look at an application such as the one from Clublink for Glen Abbey, and it just will not fly. The application for amendments to zoning and to the official plan will not pass the test of Livable Oakville or the official plan. So ORA also supports staff recommendation to deny the application to develop a huge subdivision on the culturally important Glen Abbey Golf Course, which, through the changes in the urban structure report, is not an area that Oakville wants to target as part of its growth plans to meet its obligations to achieve regional and provincial growth targets. So ORLA is in support of all three of the staff reports and recommendations and urge Council to support them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laughlin. Are there questions? Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation speaking to item 1 is Nada Musa.
We're getting a sick. We understand we're waiting for her to come up from, no? She's left. Thank you. That concludes. Are there any other residents with information for council on item number 1? I'm not seeing any. Madam Clerk, do you know of any? Then I'll confine it to table, and I would look to council for questions, further questions to staff or debate and a motion. Councillor Duddick.
I'd be pleased to move it, Your Worship.
In the Committee of the Whole, we don't have seconders. We only have a motion mover. Is there discussion? Councillor Adams.
I'd like to thank our staff for the work that they've been doing with respect to the lands in the Ninth Line Parkway area that we were discussing earlier. Appreciate the efforts to modify the way that land is treated.
Any others? It's duly moved, and I thought as mayor I might say a word to our staff. I am, as the mayor who through my original vision and leadership for the town, led us to this vision called Livable Oakville, I am incredibly heartened by the way that vision has been so well understood and strengthened by this work. I'm incredibly proud of every one of you. And with that, I'd like to call a vote on the item and to be recorded in favor of the staff recommendation. Please rise to be named. I'm not used to the lounge mic. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Elgar, Mayor Burton, Councillor Hutchins, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor O'Meara. I declare the measure passed. Now, we actually have a rule against that, and I, duty compels me to remind you of it, and I'll thank you not to do it again. Now, right, that's where I was going. So the next item before us is the public meeting and recommendation report for the town-initiated official plan amendment, cultural heritage policy updates. And the recommendation is, I'm just trying to check and make sure, where's my, oh, that's what I'm looking for. So since the report was written, council has received a number of emails and letters about item 2, which is before us now. And so the third part of the staff's recommendation should be replaced with the following. And you have a memo on your desks to this effect. I'm reading this for the benefit of the public. That notice of council's decision reflect that the comments from the public have been appropriately addressed. And with that, we will turn to Leslie Gill-Woods, and we will turn to the planning director, Mr. Simeone, who will set the item up. Mr. Simeone.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. This is the second item, as you've heard, on the agenda this evening. Again, in continuing with the discussion and kind of the themes we presented earlier, this is a continuing discussion in the context of livable Oakville. In my earlier remarks, you remembered that we said it was a commitment between the town council and the citizens of the community of Oakville. And so tonight, Leslie will be presenting the results of continued conversations with Oakville residents regarding matters of cultural heritage. In addition, this was necessary because of their cultural heritage strategy, some of the work of the urban structure, and changes in provincial policy. Again, it answers the questions, how do we want to grow, where we want to grow, and in this context specifically, what do we want to protect? So Leslie Gill-Woods will now give you the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. The staff report for this item is on page 73 of your agenda, and the associated bylaw is way back on page 701. As you know, the conservation of cultural heritage resources has been an important part of the town's land use planning and decision-making for many years. The existing cultural heritage policies and related definitions in the Livable Oakville Plan date back to 2009, and they provide a strong framework for the conservation of the town's cultural heritage resources, but it's time for an update. Council will recall that in conjunction with the enactment of the interim control bylaw, Council directed that the cultural heritage landscape assessment of the Glen Abbey Golf Course be expedited in order to, or as part of the implementation of the cultural heritage landscape strategy approved in 2014. To support the implementation of the CHL strategy, the existing cultural heritage policies in Livable Oakville should be updated to provide a policy framework that specifically addresses cultural heritage landscapes. And since we are in the midst of an official plan review, it makes sense to also review and update the cultural heritage policies and definitions to ensure conformity with the latest provincial policies and relevant local studies. As described in the staff report, the proposed OPA updates heritage-related definitions, eliminates redundant cultural heritage policies, and modifies existing cultural heritage policies, relying on updated definitions and providing for, among other things, the conservation of protected and registered cultural heritage landscapes in a manner consistent with heritage conservation districts. The proposed OPA also adds 3 new key policies. The first is to require the evaluation of a cultural heritage resource to determine its values and attributes prior to the preparation of any heritage impact assessment on that resource. This will entrench into policies an expected sequence of events that is consistent with the town's existing terms of reference for the preparation of heritage impact assessments. The second new policy is to establish that protected or registered heritage conservation districts and cultural heritage landscapes shall be identified on Schedule A1, shall be subject to applicable powers and tools for their conservation, and may be subject to area-specific land use designations and policies consistent with the applicable Heritage Conservation District Plan or Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan. This policy builds on the urban structure OPA presented earlier tonight and provides for the conservation of these key elements of the urban structure. The third policy is to require relevant supporting information where the town is reviewing and considering a proposal to alter, remove, or demolish a cultural heritage resource that is protected or registered under the Heritage Act, or a proposal to repeal a designating bylaw under that act. This will enable the town to understand how the proposal affects the heritage attributes and the cultural heritage value and interest of the cultural heritage resource, as well as options that reduce, minimize, or eliminate impacts to the cultural heritage resource. This is also consistent with existing practice, as outlined in the submission requirements for demolition and removal from register requests, which was endorsed by Council back in 2010. Council has received and continues to receive a range of feedback about the proposed OPA. As of yesterday, I'm aware of 6 letters that express concern that the proposed policy changes would allow the town to have too much control over private properties that have been recognized as cultural heritage landscapes, and also that the notice provided was inadequate. The Heritage Oakville Committee has advised through the minutes of its September 19th meeting that the updated policies and definitions will help the committee with its work. Yesterday, Council also received a letter in support of the staff report, and as I mentioned, we're continuing to receive input, and I was made aware of a letter received this afternoon from ClubLink objecting to various provisions within the proposed OPA, and it is my opinion that the issues raised have been appropriately addressed. To conclude, the planning staff is recommending that the proposed OPA be approved, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions, Council? Then I will turn to the audience for registered delegations. Madam Clerk, would you begin calling the delegations?
Our first delegation speaking to item 2 is Wendy Bodnoff.
Welcome, Ms. Bodnoff. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and Council, for hearing me tonight. I actually want to speak to number 3, but I had mentioned number 2. So while I'm up here, I just want to note that I'm quite happy with the work that the foresight that you, Mayor Burton, and Council had in implementing a cultural heritage landscape strategy 3 years ago. And the methodical way that you've worked through it has been, I think, exemplary. I've certainly learned a lot, and I think it's going to bode well for planning and setting the framework for the future, and certainly it will bode well for the implementation of future planning following the Livable Oakville Plan. So I just wanted to actually state that I'm completely in support of the amendment to the Livable Oakville Plan to include the policies from the cultural heritage landscape.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your information, and Councillor Elgar will be very happy to see you dividing your comments between the items. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Next delegation speaking to item 2 is Carol Deeth or Robert Barbers from the Clearview Oakville Community Alliance.
Ms. Deeth and Mr. Bravers, welcome, and Council's looking forward to your presentation.
Your Worship and Council members, my name is Carol Deeth and I represent COCA, the Clearview Oakville Community Alliance. We represent Clearview residents. And Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, you'd like me to speak to 2 now and 3 later?
I think that would make at least one
thank you.
member of council happier.
All right, thank you. No, I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
I'm not as strict. I try to be easygoing, but I think it's all going to get us to the same place. I hope you enjoyed the laughter over here.
I'm prepared, well, one way or the other. Thank you. As I said earlier, I represent Clearview, and we strongly support the town staff recommendation regarding the cultural heritage policy updates. Oakville's cultural heritage landscapes must be conserved, not only for their historical and community value, but also as irreplaceable assets that will grow in significance over time. Today we hear of many Oakville historians who look back into the past and wish that heritage buildings and landscapes had been protected and conserved. And had we conserved Oakville's shipbuilding heritage sites or other high-profile assets from our past, the community could be benefiting from those assets for many years to come. So that's the value of conserving. And the other comment I have on this item is that we cannot always predict the future value and significance of our cultural heritage sites. But we know, for example, that the Glen Abbey Golf Course is already Oakville's most prominent feature on the international stage. So, as I said earlier, we support the staff recommendation, and we also want to acknowledge the clarity that the staff reports contain. It really helps us as members of the public to get a sense of the context of the issue and the overall main points, and the reports are always very well written. So please vote yes on cultural heritage policy updates.
Thank you, Ms. Deeth. Are there questions? Ms. Deeth, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Just to confirm that Doug McCurkin has spoken on item 2 and doesn't wish to speak again.
He's nodding concurrence.
So the next delegation to item 2 is Jonathan Culligan.
Mr. Culligan, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Just ask for a place document here.
We can get technical assistance to make that happen momentarily.
Thank you.
Help is on the way, I think.
Thank you.
Mr. Culligan, before you begin, I'll make an announcement for the residents in the atrium that if there are members of the public with information for council on this item, they should make their way to the council chamber. And with that, we're ready to hear you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm here to speak in respect to the ClubLink application, which is the email I had submitted to town. So if it might seem out of order, it was not my intent.
All right, then I think we've just had a bookkeeping error, and it would be my suggestion that you wait until we get to that item.
Okay.
Thank you. Good of you to clarify that off the top.
Sure. Okay. If in the interest of council, you'd like me to speak now to get it out of the way since I'm up here?
No. It's actually in the interest of procedure that we speak to the items as they're considered. So I'm waiting to see a sign from one of our clerks that if there's anyone coming from the atrium or not. This might be one of those moments where former Mayor Harry Barrett would be pleased for me to say that this is a kind of a moment that illustrates the wisdom of what he always says, which is Oakville is a city that calls itself a town and acts like a village. All right, Council. Everyone's been very good to wait. We'll confine it to table, and I'll look to you for a decision or questions. Councillor Knoll.
I'd be happy to move the staff recommendation on this matter.
Are there any comments or discussion? A recorded vote for Councillor Elgar. If there's no other discussion, I will ask you to rise to be named to be recorded in support, and I'll call the negatives later. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Elgar, Mayor Burton, Councillor Hutchins, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor O'Meara. I declare the measure carried. Now, Council, I would like a mover for the bylaws that relate to... Oh, the clerk has changed her mind. Well, like I said, city, town, village. All right. That brings us to item number 3, and with that, we're going to turn our attention to our planning director, Mr. Simeone.
You ready? All right. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. So we're item 3 this evening. This one deals with the applications for official plan amendment, draft plan of subdivision rezoning of the Glen Abbey property. And I recognize that the application involves an official plan amendment, but I think it's important to note that it doesn't relieve someone from an opportunity to consider how applications can be inserted or brought into the fabric of the community. So as we had said earlier, Livable Oakville represents the completion of a successful dialogue amongst citizens and a council about a shared vision for the future. It demonstrates how growth can occur, where it can occur, and what should be protected. And we've considered minor amendments to the urban structure tonight to provide further clarity and certainty around those types of dialogues. This is a significant piece, and when we considered the applications, it's important to realize from a staff standpoint, this was a very foundational piece. That and the cultural heritage piece that we've also considered this evening. These matters are really fundamental to how staff have viewed the application, and I think it's important for everyone to understand that. Glen Abbey, in part, helps define the neighborhood that it's in. It provides an open space to a neighborhood who itself enjoys the opportunity to be in proximity to that feature. The removal of that, we believe, is fundamental to the removal of the character of the Glen Abbey neighborhood. And this is a feature that's inserted into Livable Oakville. Section 4.3 tells us the character is important, stability of the residential neighborhoods are important, and growth should go where growth should occur. And there are opportunities for growth in the community. The significant impact that this would impose on the cultural heritage landscape that's been identified in the property is so significant that staff feel the application should not proceed. And the changes that it imposes on the urban structure are so significant that staff feel the applications should not proceed. We understand that there are concerns that have been raised by members of the community. We acknowledge them. They're acknowledged in the report. These relate to things like traffic and other matters that I would call perhaps on a technical level. These are important, but I would simply like to indicate to council that from a staff standpoint, the 2 biggest items in our mind as we consider this, and as you understand Paul Barrett's presentation, relate to the urban structure and matters of cultural heritage. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Paul Barrett, Senior Planner, and I would like to acknowledge that Paul is the lead author of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to introduce the planning applications as part of the statutory public meeting and to provide a comprehensive staff evaluation and a recommendation on the applications submitted by ClubLink. The report can be found on page 93 to 672 of tonight's agenda. The subject lands are generally located at the southeast quadrant of Upper Mill Road and Dorval Drive. The property is municipally known as 1333 Dorval Drive. The subject lands are designated as private open space and natural area by the Livable Oakville Plan with 2 site-specific exceptions. Uses permitted within the private open space designation include legally existing golf courses, legally existing recreation facilities, trails, and conservation uses. The first site-specific exception applies to the portion of the lands designated private open space, which permits additional uses related to the golf course, including a hotel, conference center, dining facilities, limited retail, and administration office. The second exception applies to the valley land portion of the property, which permits the existing golf course to be restored and or rebuilt to its previous condition if damaged by natural disaster. The subject lands are zoned private open space and natural area with special provision 114 applying to part of the private open space zone. The O2 zone permits community, open space, and service commercial uses, including a golf course and accessory uses. Special provision 114 permits additional uses, including a hotel. Neither the land use designations or zoning permit the proposed development. In terms of what is proposed, the applicant seeks to redevelop the Glen Abbey Golf Course. This includes 141 detached dwellings on the eastern portion of the site, 3,081 units in the form of back-to-back conventional and stacked townhouses and apartments focused along Street A, which range in height up to 12 stories. In total, 3,222 residential units are proposed. In addition, mixed use, including retail and office, are proposed in the red blocks as shown on this slide. A village market in the stable buildings is also proposed and highlighted in black. The Radar Estate, which is shown on the plan of subdivision for contextual purposes, would be retained by ClubLink and its use as an office complex maintained. The balance of the site would consist of new roads, stormwater ponds, walkways, natural heritage system, and parks, which would be required to be dedicated or assumed by the town. Planning staff circulated the development application to internal departments and external agencies, and the town retained a multidisciplinary team of experts to undertake a peer review of certain submitted materials and reports. Relevant policies and supporting guidelines were reviewed in their entirety, with applicable policies applied. Accommodating growth within the built boundary is a necessity. However, the way in which this growth is accommodated requires careful consideration and a balance of a number of relevant components applied on a regional and town-wide basis. Development applications that have the potential to impact the town's urban structure must be evaluated against this larger policy framework that was established to achieve provincial, regional, and town interests to ensure that these principles, as expressed and implemented through the urban structure, are maintained. Through the staff and peer review of this application, two fundamental considerations emerged which informed the opinion to recommend refusal of these development applications. They relate to conservation of significant cultural heritage resources and where and how to grow. Conservation of features of significant cultural interest is a provincial interest. Similarly, the PPS states significant cultural heritage landscapes shall be conserved, and the growth plan requires cultural heritage landscapes to be conserved. In the view of staff and the experts retained by the town in connection with the cultural heritage landscape strategy respecting these lands, the Glen Abbey Golf Course is a significant cultural heritage landscape as defined by provincial policy. In order to conserve a cultural heritage landscape as required by provincial and local policy, it's critical to protect, manage, and use the landscape in a manner that ensures its cultural heritage value or interest is retained under the Ontario Heritage Act. The applicant has proposed a conservation strategy intended to conserve selected features of the landscape in the valley and on the valley's edge, and to enhance the master plan by rooting the design of the parks and open space in the history of the site. The strategy proposed is referred to as the 6 big ideas for an evolving landscape. And it includes a greenway park, valley edge open space, a great belvedere, a village market, central park and social hub, and valley open space. The town engaged a peer review expert to assess the applicant's conservation strategy, who found that the big 6 ideas highlight the problems with erasing an intact cultural heritage landscape. The premise of removing an intact, significant cultural heritage landscape only to commemorate it as part of the development that removed it in the first place runs counter to the central intent of cultural heritage resource protection in Ontario's regulatory environment. Staff do not believe that the applications can serve the cultural heritage value or interest of the Glen Abbey significant cultural heritage landscape. The proposed development would contravene provincial, regional, and town cultural heritage resource protection requirements, which form an integral part of the Ontario policy-led land use planning and decision-making system. Mr. Mayor and members of council, to put this into perspective, and based on the work undertaken by the town for the property through the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy and the advice from the town's peer review consultant, staff are of the opinion that any development resulting in removal of the golf course would not retain the cultural heritage value or interest under the Ontario Heritage Act. Moving on to where and how to grow, the Greater Golden Horseshoe is rapidly growing. The magnitude of growth that is expected over the coming decades can present several challenges, such as traffic congestion, urban sprawl, physical inactivity and related health impacts, impacts of globalization and a changing economy, and demand for major infrastructure. The province has provided strong direction to integrate land use and transportation planning to support a high quality of life, a prosperous economy, a protected environment for the next 25 years. Transit is the first priority for transportation investment. More than $30 billion is being invested by the province in rapid transit infrastructure in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area over the next 8 years alone. This image shows a draft of the proposed regional frequent rapid transit network, which would update the existing Big Move plan prepared by Metrolinx. When implementing provincial plans and planned interregional transportation network in the Oakville and surrounding contexts, a series of provincial, regional, and local nodes and corridors are defined, and these include the Lakeshore GO Line, the planned Dundas Street Rapid Transit, planned Highway 407 Transitway, the GO and other planned transit in Milton, and Bronte Road and Trafalgar Road, which connect to Milton. The Livable Oakville Plan further defines these provincial corridors into a series of nodes and corridors to accommodate the majority of new population growth in areas of the town where new infrastructure investments have been made or are planned to be made. The urban structure coordinates land use and infrastructure requirements that establishes a framework and a policy context for decision-making that provides certainty for the planning process. It is also fundamental in achieving a number of provincial interests and guides public and private investment decisions. Within the town, the Livable Oakville Plan establishes 6 growth areas. 3 Main Street growth areas south of the QEW, and 3 primary growth areas, being Midtown Oakville, which is centered on the Oakville GO Station, Uptown, centered on Trafalgar Road and Dundas Street, and Palermo Village, which is centered at Bronte Road and Dundas Street. The Livable Oakville Plan also directs growth to corridors, which are detailed in the urban structure review considered by Council earlier today. This review also identifies nodes subject to further study,
including the Bronte GO Station, Neagawa, and Highway 407 along the planned 407 Transitway, and a node adjacent to the new hospital along Dundas Street. When major growth areas are proposed, the policies of the Halton Plan require an area-specific plan to be undertaken by the town to ensure that growth is planned for in a coordinated, integrated manner that comprehensively implements the goals and objectives of the Halton Plan and is supported by existing or planned infrastructure. Moving forward, this will be accomplished through integrated planning between the region and the town as required by the growth plan. The Livable Oakville Plan is structured so that the majority of new growth to accommodate residential intensification is directed to the 6 growth areas and defined corridors. Intensification is required to preserve, enhance, and protect the distinct cultural heritage, living environment, and sense of community of neighborhoods. While some intensification is permitted outside growth areas and corridors, in order to protect stable residential neighborhoods, there are strict policies placing intensification on lands within existing low, medium, or high-density residential land use designations. And certain larger sites located outside of growth areas, which are not within stable residential neighborhoods where redevelopment is anticipated, are identified as special policy areas and are subject to special policies contemplating future comprehensive study before these areas can develop. The Glen Abbey Golf Course is identified as a residential area on the urban structure schedule of the Livable Oakville Plan, and it is recognized as part of a stable residential community. The level of development proposed on the Glen Abbey Golf Course is substantial and would be comparable to an existing growth area of the town in terms of area, proposed population, and density. It would constitute approximately 1/4 of the town's forecasted growth anticipated to 2031 within the built boundary. In staff's view, the application is proposing to remove a significant cultural heritage landscape to redevelop the site with a high-density node in the interior of a stable residential community, which is not served by an existing or planned higher order or frequent transit infrastructure. The proposed development imposes a significant risk of undermining the town's urban structure by redirecting growth from identified nodes and corridors, delaying timely development within those areas that is required to make effective and efficient use of existing and planned public investment. More specifically, this could also direct a significant proportion of growth away from existing or planned higher order transit, which would be contrary to an established principle of the growth plan of coordinating transit infrastructure with growth management. Through the town's urban structure review, it was determined that the subject lands are not an appropriate location for the creation of a new growth area, given the absence of existing or planned transit service that would support the creation of a new node. Further, the town has confirmed through its urban structure review where and how the town will accommodate future growth to achieve its intensification target to 2031 and its estimated population and employment forecast to 2041. The foregoing issues highlight the provincial growth plan requirement to only allow the establishment of a new strategic growth area through a municipally led and comprehensive, integrated, and coordinated land use planning process known as a municipal comprehensive review. The Canadian government, the province, the region, and the town plans to, or have, invested significant public resources into supporting the town's planned urban structure, which is outlined on this slide. The Glen Abbey Golf Course is not adjacent to any of these public investments and is served by a basic bus route characteristic of the low-density, stable residential community which surrounds it. In staff's view, the proposed development would have the effect of replacing a significant cultural heritage landscape with a development characteristic of a growth area, which is located internal to a stable residential community. this poses a significant risk of undermining the town's urban structure required to make effective and efficient use of existing and planned public investment. This would also violate a principle of a livable community. A principle of creating a livable community is to preserve, enhance, and protect the distinct character, cultural heritage, living environment, and sense of community of neighborhoods. While some growth could be permitted within stable residential communities, the Livable Oakville Plan provides strong criteria to maintain and protect the existing neighborhood character and is applied to new development within the context of the plan. It is staff's opinion that these policies were not intended to justify a wholesale change in land use on a large site commensurate in scale to a growth area within a stable residential neighborhood. When the proposed development is reviewed in the context of provincial policy, it is clear that the cultural heritage landscape helps define the character of the area. For instance, the provincial policy statement recognizes that long-term economic prosperity should be supported by encouraging a sense of place, by promoting well-designed built form and cultural planning, and by conserving features that help define character, including cultural heritage landscapes. Similarly, the growth plan requires cultural heritage resources to be conserved in order to foster a sense of place and to benefit communities. The Glen Abbey Golf Course was designed to be part of the surrounding stable residential community from the onset. This prominent open space feature forms part of a defining open space characteristic of the stable residential community. Further, the Glen Abbey Golf Course is a significant cultural heritage resource, which helps define character of the surrounding area and the town, and it fosters a sense of place. The proposed development would diminish the character of the area by removing this important feature. Next, I wanted to highlight the agency and peer review comments briefly, not for the significant deficiencies identified by the agency and peer review, but the lack of a comprehensive approach in the applicant's supporting studies. Examples include there's a lack of a holistic system-based assessment of 16 Mile Creek and McCraney Creek drainage areas. There is evidence of slope instabilities in the vicinity of the site, including the east side of the creek, which have not been assessed. And the study area of the transportation impact assessment must be expanded. Public comments on this application have been substantial. 368 pages of public comments have been appended to the staff report as Appendix B. Additional comments have been received since the date of the report and have been distributed to Council. Staff have reviewed the comments and summarized the main concerns as shown. Residents' concerns with the application have been discussed in the staff report through the review of the development application. Detailed technical comments, including traffic impact, natural heritage impact, cultural heritage, and urban structure, have been provided for in the report. The application before Council tonight proposes a development which contravenes numerous provincial, regional, and town policy requirements, which form an integral part of the Ontario policy-led land use planning and decision-making system. The full staff conclusions listed in the staff report are provided on these slides. However, I'll summarize the findings. The proposed development would remove a significant cultural heritage landscape. It would direct approximately 1/4 of the residential growth within the built boundary allocated to the town to the year 2031 on one site that is located internal to a stable residential neighborhood devoid of any existing planned higher order or frequent transit service, fails to uphold principles of the growth plan, including coordinating land use planning with transportation investments and infrastructure. It represents a substantial deviation from the approved and enforced growth management strategy. Approval of this application could undermine the town's urban structure by redirecting growth from identified nodes and corridors, delaying timely development, and result in inefficient use of existing and planned investments. It also contravenes the growth plan by proposing a strategic growth area outside of a municipal comprehensive review. It would not preserve the character of the surrounding stable residential community, and it fails to meet key policies regarding the protection of the natural heritage system, in addition to numerous other technical deficiencies. Considering the foregoing, staff are of the view that the applications do not represent good planning and are not consistent or in conformity with applicable provincial, regional, and town policy, and approval of the applications would not be in the public interest. Accordingly, staff recommend that the applications be refused. Based on the foregoing, Your Worship, should Council agree with the analysis and conclusions and recommendations of the staff report, Council could consider passing the following resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett, for a very interesting tour through the staff report for the benefit of the public. Council, have you questions for staff? Madam Clerk, would you call the listed delegations?
First delegation speaking to item 3 is Ron Tingle.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. I'm representing just myself, and I have a different take on the Glen Abbey project at this time. It'll focus on the issue of lack of affordable public access to golf in Oakville. I'm focusing on that part, and how Glen Abbey's potential redevelopment can instead be an intergenerational opportunity to permanently enhance the town's golf heritage. As an Oakville resident for the past 35 years, I have watched 5 golf facilities available to the public close and become housing developments. Forever gone are the affordable public golf courses and facilities for young parents to introduce their children to the game of golf. Golfing in Oakville is now a misnomer. It really means driving a long way to a facility in an adjacent town. The most recent public golf course, Sawat, which we've talked about earlier, is lying dormant for the time being, but a housing development has been approved. The recent outcry over the development of Glen Abbey evokes memories of the infamous gas plant cancellation. Because Glen Abbey is such a high-profile facility and well-known as the home of Canadian golf, housing the Golf Canada head office, and the Canadian Open tournament on numerous occasions, everyone suddenly perks up to protest its conversion to thousands of housing units. However, the course is generally not available to the public. Club league ownership precludes that, and prior to that, so expensive that primarily corporate golfers accessed it. The average resident of Oakville, I suspect, doesn't really care whether the site remains a golf course or becomes housing. In the 51 weeks between the Canadian Open tournaments, citizens of Oakville are hardly aware of the course. Most golfers as Club Link members are not residents of the town and play it among dozens of other exclusive golf course options in the GTA. And during the event, most residents wish it wasn't being hosted here again and again with all the traffic and commotion it brings. Golf Canada has recently been exploring other venues in the GTA as alternate sites for the Open. Let's let Glen Abbey move into its latter years as a shining example of an urban renewal in cooperation with the developer, and not try to prolong the wonderful 40-year history it has provided to Canadian golf. It's time for us to accept and in fact embrace the opportunity to create a long-term legacy to the coming generations. Oakville says it is the home of Canadian golf, but there is no publicly owned golf course, and by that I mean municipally owned golf course, available to residents of the town. Toronto, Mississauga, Burlington, and Hamilton have had city-owned courses for decades. One, Lakeview in Mississauga, in fact, hosted the Canadian Open at one time. In Visit the Visit Oakville promotional guide published by the town, of the 10 publicly available golf courses and facilities listed, only 3, including a driving range, are within the town's boundaries. I am suggesting a consideration for the developer and the town to demonstrate good faith in the proposal to build a residential community and allocate the lower portion of the current course in the floodplain along 16 Mile Creek as a town-owned and operated public course. This course would be a facility designed to appeal to starter golfers, families, and seniors. The 80 acres available is sufficient to allow golf and parkland use to coexist comfortably. Hamilton has just such a facility with its Shadok Golf Course, located with a wonderful park for hiking, biking, and natural wildlife adjacent. If the Glen Abbey goes the way of all the other golf facilities, the home of Canadian golf will become a mockery instead of a guiding inspiration of land use. Instead, let's have a locally accessible golf course in the very heart of the town, which can be utilized for the enjoyment of generations to come, instead of a permanent reduction of public green space with the current Club Link proposal. The central location of Glen Abbey is a unique refuge as an urban oasis. Let's use this last opportunity to help the town ensure its commitment to its motto, Canada's most livable town, by permanently including in its plans the land use consistent with its true golf heritage. Thank you for allowing me to offer an alternative approach to the use of the Glen Abbey lands, which will encourage future developers to optimize their assets while the local community enjoys and in fact welcomes its contribution to the long-term enjoyment of our only non-renewable resource, land. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors, and staff.
Thank you, Mr. Tingle, for your presentation and your information. Other questions? Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Dan Carruthers.
Mr. Carruthers, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. I think you're being challenged tonight with a very important decision, and it's not really about saving the golf course. I mean, the golf course has a process that's going on through the heritage protection that you've granted it. And then yesterday, Mr. Sahi, the head of Club Link, kind of announced that he was going to bulldoze it and maybe just make it into a parkland. So what happens with the Glen Abbey Golf Course is something that will be to be determined. But I think you're making a very important decision to support the livable Oakville plan that you put in place and its structure and policies. As we all understand, the current owner of Glen Abbey has asked for an exemption to the current plan. They're requesting that you be allow them to put into a non-designated area the equivalent of a small village, some 6,000 people, into an already existing residential community. It's not needed, it's not wanted. You'll hear lots of technical things about lost green space, traffic challenges, and other objections. But the real issue here is that it doesn't meet your basic guidelines of a livable plan. That particular plan has already been supported tonight. It has a long-term view for the future and how the city will grow. It's supported by all the things that your staff have put together. It's out there for the growth for many, many years to come. So I think the issue really is, what are we going to do with this particular property? You're faced with making a decision about whether you approve it or not. I think a lot of money and time has been spent on this already. Your staff has put together a very good recommendation, very comprehensive recommendation that says that you shouldn't go forward. I think when you couple that with the heritage designation, it really makes it a no-go sort of development. I think what really concerns me is that we have the interference of an outside body on top of an already well-designed plan. The famous Ontario Municipal Board, or OMB, has made a decision that grants that this application is valid. I think this is exactly the thing that the province identified back in early 2017 is what's wrong with the OMB's mandate. And they did review and really have come back with some recommendations for next year that's saying something like this shouldn't happen. They shouldn't be allowed to come in and overstep a well-thought-out plan, such as the Livable Oakville Plan, with all the documentation, all the supporting studies that have taken place. Today, you need to support the recommendations of your staff. They've done a fine job. It's a very comprehensive report. I'm not, as I said before, a planner, but when I read it, it made sense. It made sense to me as a resident, and I think I studied it in quite a bit of detail. If you vote for it, you're kind of saying to the constituents of the town that you don't believe in what you put in place. You're saying that you don't support the staff recommendations. You're saying that to your constituents that they can no longer rely on council to stick to their guns when a big developer comes in with lots of money and lots of resources and tries to bull their way into the community. And you're also saying to other developers that it's fair game in Oakville. So as long as you have the money and resources and political connections to make it happen. I don't think we're naive that the decision that made tonight is over. I think it will go on to the next level of decision-making outside of the town. We can't predict what will happen at that point in time, but I'm very confident that what your staff has put together as supporting documents and in coming to the decision will really support you on making that decision, and outsiders making the right decision. So I'm here to compliment staff for their recommendation. I'm asking council to seriously consider turning down this application, and let's move forward and see what the next step is. I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Carl Tura.
It's a tough name to pronounce.
Mr. Chura.
Good evening, Mayor Burton, councillors, fellow Oakvillians, and visitors. My name is Carl Twira. We were among the first families to move into Glen Abbey. We bought our home sight unseen in 1981 from Australia from blueprints. When we moved in, there were only farms and wheat fields and the just designed Glen Abbey Golf Course. We still live in that very same home that we bought in 1981. I have with me the original brochure for the community, introducing Glen Abbey, the world-class community of the 80s. Here it is, here it is. And one photo has Jack Nicklaus hovering over a putt, the 11th hole in the valley in the fall, a family biking on trails, and the sun rising over the horizon of Oakville. Inside, it starts off with the homes of Glen Abbey share the beautiful setting of the internationally famous Glen Abbey Golf Course and its Jack Nicklaus designed championship course. Within it, it goes on to say, in Glen Abbey, the traditional brick homes will be set in small neighborhoods that have been designed individually to the flow of the land. Plus, you'll have all the conveniences and special charm of Oakville with its 4 yacht clubs, many cultural and sports facilities, and your choice of 2 convenient GO train stations. The new Oakville Place is now open. You have the rare opportunity to reserve a premier property in a world-class community. And it is a world-class community and was recognized as such. Developers came from around the world to talk with Genstar and the town and to admire the design. Among the innovative concepts was increasing housing density by reducing the house lot sizes and taking that land and making it available to the whole town via trails, woodlots, and playing fields. The golf course played a key role, adding green space and further community facilities. At that point, the golf course was owned by the developer Genstar. And replacing a world-renowned golf course with housing was unthinkable to that developer. Now there is an application to scrap that design. The developer is proposing to rip out the internationally renowned golf course and replace it with 3,222 homes plus commercial and retail space. They say it's 6,400 people, they say. Glen Abbey has a population of about 30,000. That means that over 20% more people will be plunked down into the heart of old Glen Abbey, totally unplanned and unplannable, destroying the design of Glen Abbey. I am proud of that design and of our beautiful community. Last month, my son's father-in-law, Jocelyn, came from Quebec City to visit our mutual grandkids. I took him biking. We biked to downtown Oakville and admired historic old Oakville. I took him on a tour of Glen Abbey then. As we biked along the trails, I pointed out the many sports fields and children's parks, and even the town flower garden at Notting Hill Gate. We went by the community center, facilities of all sorts surrounded by playing fields of all types. We biked by townhouses, apartment buildings, community housing, stores, restaurants, and office buildings, as well as houses. I proudly pointed out the magnificent new hospital in the distance where our mutual granddaughter was born. We passed schools all over the place, elementary, high school, public, Catholic, which reminds me, I didn't see any plans for a school in the development application. In 1981, when we moved in, the site for the old Abbey School had been approved, but funding was delayed by the province. Our Ratepayers Association, yes, we did have a Glen Abbey Ratepayers Association, invited our then MPP, James Snow, to hear us out. And although he was a very busy cabinet minister, he came to our house and listened to the ratepayer executive. A year later, construction of our school was underway. James Snow believed in listening to and supporting his community, a true representative of the people. Where, oh where are you, Kevin Flynn? Coming back to our bike ride on the Glen Abbey Golf Course, we biked on the town trail by the 11th hole, and I pointed out to Jocelyn that this was the Glen Abbey Golf Course. Ah, he said. I then mentioned that there was a request to turn it into housing. No, impossible, no. Oui? Oh, mon Dieu. He asked whether we could play a round of golf there in the next few days. We tried to book a tee time, but unfortunately there were no tee times available. The business of golf in Oakville seems to be doing just fine, thank you. Returning home, we had to wait a few minutes for the light to change on Dorval Drive at the golf course entrance. I have no idea how we will handle the additional traffic from 3,000 plus homes on Dorval in the morning. I read ClubLink's transportation plan, and even though I have an MBA, I got lost in all the bizarre assumptions, scenarios, and buried figures. It did seem to say that there would not be gridlock at the golf course entrance. It would only have reached a volume to capacity rating of 97%, or 3% below gridlock. Apparently, good enough. I am sure the town of Oakville has done their own traffic analysis. But for my own satisfaction, I went out on Wednesday morning to the golf course entrance and counted the cars going south between 7:30 and 8:30 a.m. 1,518 cars, or one car every 1-2 seconds. Add to that the cars that would be exiting from 3,000 plus homes in the new development. Where are the cars going to go? Dorval is backed up and Fourth Line is very busy. And I don't think rafting the cars down 16 Mile Creek will work. I can understand why ClubLink wants to take advantage of the over 40 years of hard work, design, investment, development, and living that has created Glen Abbey. After all, Together, we Oakvillians have built a highly desirable community. Thankfully, Morgard's model for development is not Oakville's model for development. Not Oakville's Old Town model, not Oakville's renowned Glen Abbey model, not Oakville's current plan to make it the most livable town in Canada. But Oakville, it is true, has shown that it supports development. Since we moved in 1981, Oakville has grown 300%, from 68,000 to 226,000, but in a livable and planned manner. And Oakville has ongoing projects underway for continued planned, livable development. The conveniences and special charm of Oakville mentioned in this 1980 brochure still exist. The sports and community centers, the 4 yacht clubs, the 2 GO train stations, and Oakville Place. The Glen Abbey Golf Course should continue to exist as well. A world-renowned golf course, an exceptional green space, and since day one, an integral part of the character of Oakville and the community of Glen Abbey. My home, our town. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Mark Konzelman.
Welcome, sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Town Council, for allowing me to speak. My name is Mark Konzelman. I'm a ratepayer and 22-year resident of Oakville, currently residing in Fairway Hills, Oakville. I'm against the rezoning application that ClubLink is seeking for the redevelopment of Glen Abbey Golf Course. It is wrong on all fronts. I come before you as a 22-year resident of Glen Abbey, and much like the gentleman before me, I've seen the transformation of Glen Abbey and the growth, but all within boundaries and rules to date. And as a current resident homeowner in Fairway Hills, I'm also representing my residency in Fairway Hills, as well as I'm a member, obviously, of the Save Glen Abbey group. A bit about me personally. I bought my dream house some 12 years ago in Fairway Hills. Much like the gentleman before me, I was marketed that my dream house was living in a, quote, golf course community called Fairway Hills. It has streets like Masters Green and the Links and, ironically, Golfview Court. Funny that, Golfview Court. My house has a cut-in in the garage where I'm supposed to park a golf cart, plug it in, charge it up, and be able to drive to the golf course. You get the picture. I, like so many of my neighbors, paid a substantive premium for my lot and my house to be within a golf course community and on a golf course lot. ClubLink has tried very, very hard to portray us, me, others as just some rich guys. I've seen this in the paper repeatedly, who play golf, and that we are NIMBYs, not in my backyard people. Nothing could be further from the point. They have erred in this assumption. As a member of Save Glen Abbey Group, we have communicated with literally thousands and thousands of the town's people in Oakville. I think our petition is now over 8,700 and growing daily. Let me be very clear. The people of the town of Oakville are against and do not want the redevelopment of the Glen Abbey Golf Course, right across the board. I'm urging Town Council to refuse the official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment, and the draft plan of subdivision as put forward by ClubLink. Livable Oakville. Starting in 2009, the town of Oakville spent considerable time and millions of dollars in extensive consultation with consultants, the public, and multiple reviews to complete a very, very extensive study of Oakville to come up with a master plan for Oakville, livable Oakville, and setting out a correct and balanced growth strategy for Oakville through 2031, with a formulation of where growth and intensification should occur. And that's including full infrastructure, transportation, and servicing requirements. It is simply not proper that ClubLink, or for that matter, any other group or developer, simply dismisses livable Oakville, this master plan, and ignores its concepts, its principles, its planning rules, and its guidelines. The livable Oakville plan applies to all lands within the town except the North Oakville East and West Secondary Plan area. It sets out council's policy on how these lands should be used and how growth should be managed to 2031. It has been followed consistently by the town of Oakville. Livable Oakville is a sound master plan for growth and should continue to be followed. Your mission statement is quite clear: to enhance the town's natural, cultural, social, and economic environments by ensuring that environmental sustainability, cultural vibrancy, economic prosperity, and social well-being are incorporated into growth and development decisions. Specifically, planning authorities shall identify appropriate locations and promote opportunities for intensification and redevelopment where this can be accommodated, and this is important, taking into account existing building stock or areas, including brownfield sites and the availability of suitable existing or planned infrastructure and public service facilities required to accommodate projected needs. The Livable Oakville Plan directs intensification and urban development, as you know, to 6 growth areas: Midtown Oakville, Uptown Core, Palermo Village, Kerr Village, Bronte Village, and downtown Oakville. These are the specific and targeted growth areas where Oakville has already grown and will continue to successfully intensify. Glen Abbey Golf Course was never a target node for growth, and there is no reason, absolutely no reason, to grant density or change its current designation. Town Council and the various consultants under Livable Oakville wisely and correctly identified the need to promote and protect green space for the town of Oakville. Specifically, the Glen Abbey Golf Course is recognized under the Livable Oakville Plan, and its subject lands are designated as private open space and natural area. The uses, and they've already been recorded in this meeting previously, include the legally existing golf course, legally existing recreational facilities, trails, existing cemeteries, and it goes on, and it's already been quoted. ClubLink knew exactly what it was purchasing when it acquired Glen Abbey for $40 million. It purchased a golf course and nothing more than a golf course. It did not purchase, nor did it pay for the mega density that it is seeking, or the zoning rights worth in excess of $300 million or more, which is exactly what ClubLink is asking for. It has not paid property taxes based on the residential and commercial zoning on these values. And in fact, I'm led to believe that it has paid taxes at an land value or golf course value, which is far less than the mill rate that we as citizens of Oakville are paying for our residential property taxes. ClubLink knew and acknowledged what it was buying, a golf course. It has done absolutely nothing to entitle it to $300 million or more of zoning value. It would be the exact same concept if myself and a dozen of my neighbors in Fairway Hills put in a redevelopment application for a 20-story luxury condo unit, say 80 units, on our property. The density and zoning might be worth some $40 to $50 million if council were to grant such density rights. It's the same concept. Council would not support that application, and they would not be following, of course, the existing planning and zoning guidelines under Livable Oakville. They should not allow ClubLink to do the same thing, completely disregarding the town's zoning protocol, goals, growth principles under Livable Oakville. ClubLink purchased a golf course with significant cultural and historical heritage. Town council have already researched and moved to protect the Glen Abbey Golf Course. It is broader than just a golf course. It is synonymous with the town of Oakville. It is an asset that has significant economic and branding impact to the town of Oakville. Each time it hosts the Canadian Open, now some 29 times, Canada's National Golf Open, it brings in tens of millions of dollars each year to our local Oakville economy. There is no other single event that I'm aware of with this impact or importance to the town of Oakville. Glen Abbey was purposely designed and built by the great Jack Nicklaus as a stadium course for the specific purpose of hosting the Canadian Open. This year's Canadian Open was one of the best ever. The ClubLink notions that it is no longer suitable for a PGA Tour event are simply false. The sponsor RBC loves it, the pros love it, just ask Jonathan Vegas, and more importantly, the fans love it, as evidenced by the record crowds in attendance, and as well the feedback that it ranks within the top 10 tournament experiences on the PGA Tour. The zoning in place does not permit the massive density request that ClubLink is seeking. It permits a golf course, nothing more, nothing less. The existing zoning should be preserved, the golf course should be protected. The density requested by ClubLink is obscene. Of the 3,222 residential units requested, only 5%, or 141 of 322 residential units, are low-density residential units, with a whopping 95% of the units ultra-high density designated with up to 12 stories of apartment condo towers. This level of density is not in keeping with the existing community of Glen Abbey, nor with the town of Oakville. Let me reread from Livable Oakville. Planning authorities shall identify appropriate locations and promote opportunities for intensification and redevelopment where this can be accommodated, taking into account the existing building stock or areas. The Glen Abbey community is 95% low-density, single-family housing, not the other way around. The density of having 95% high density is more Toronto-like and is not in keeping with the character and the community of Glen Abbey. This application should not be granted.
Mr. Councilman, are you wrapping up?
I will.
Thank you.
Let me just say, because I'm out of time, what is striking. As a common citizen, I've gotten involved deeply in Save Glen Abbey, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of citizens, strangers that I didn't know in Oakville. And I've been out canvassing, and I've been out different events, and what I can tell you that is very striking, and I've seen this over and over again, out of all the people that I've talked to, there is not a single party, not one in Oakville, that wants this rezoning application to go through. It is with one voice within the town of Oakville in unison, and they're saying that this application should not be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Next delegation is Peter Longo.
I graduated from crutches to a cane today, so I'm very happy.
Welcome, Mr. Longo. We're glad to see that you haven't injured yourself further.
The night is still young. Anyway, good evening, Your Worship, Mayor Burton, town councillors, town staff, and fellow Oakville citizens. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in support of Oakville Town Council's approval of the recommendations as outlined in the report from the Town Planning Services Department dated September 12th, 2017, relating to the official plan amendments for urban structure review. So file 421552 with related bylaws 2017 079, 080, and 081, and the cultural heritage policy updates, file 42-24-016 with related bylaws 2017-089 for livable Oakville. In addition, I'm in support of Oakville Town Council's rejection of the development application for 1333 Dorval Avenue, Glen Abbey Golf Course, with its associated official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment requests. In reviewing the Town Planning Services reports and recommendations relating to urban structure, cultural heritage policy updates, and the development application for Glen Abbey Golf Course, I recognize the thoroughness to which staff considered all aspects of provincial, regional, and town policy requirements. This includes consideration of the town's growth plan for 2017, the provincial policy statement on land use planning from 2014, the Halton Region official plan, and the Livable Oakville plan, just to name a few. The depth of review and analysis, including third-party peer review, underlines the extensive process undertaken by Town Planning Services, which gives me great comfort as a concerned citizen that the correct steps and processes are being undertaken to effectively provide guidance to our town council. As someone with an urban environmental planning background, a parent of 4 children, employed as a business person in the public health care sector, and being a longtime volunteer in this community, I view options for places to live in slightly differently than your average citizen. The lens in which I scrutinize all aspects of a community factors in economic, social, and environmental considerations, all of which the town of Oakville, historically and presently, does an excellent job of managing. You should be proud, or we should be proud, of how the town of Oakville is considered in the top 10 most livable cities in Canada. We should be proud of how the town is within the safest regions of Canada. We should be proud that the town has a natural heritage system that is the envy of all other municipalities across the GTA, provincially, nationally, and internationally. It is with great confidence that I have chosen to live and raise my children in the town of Oakville. I know that the town planning staff, with careful and well thought out consideration, recommends that Town Council reject the development application for Glen Abbey Golf Course. Both staff and council know that if the Glen Abbey Golf Course is allowed to be developed, it will tear the heart out of this amazing town. All the previous considerations, careful considerations of balancing the various tangible and intangible aspects of what defines and differentiates this amazing community will be unraveled to unparalleled proportions. Your Worship, Mayor Burton, members of Town Council, please continue to nurture and protect those aspects of Oakville that define it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Longo, for your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation, please.
Next delegation is Paul Rice, sorry, on behalf of Fairway Hills Community Association.
Where's Mary?
Apparently, welcome, Mr. Rice. Apparently, some people know you better than the clerk. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Good evening, Worship, members of Council. I'll try to be very quick and to the point. My name is Paul Rice. I am the president of the Fairway Hills Ratepayers Association. I'm the official speaker for the Ferry Hills Ratepayers Association tonight. As some of you may know, Ferry Hills is one of the first residential communities to be developed with adjacency to Glen Abbey Golf Course as its organizing design principle. So it was designed around the golf course back in the day. All the homes and members of the association are part of what staff report calls the Glen Abbey neighborhood, which contributes to the physical context and immediate neighborhood against which the proposed development application should be reviewed. I'm here tonight to express support of the staff's recommended refusal, not only of the official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and the plan of subdivision applications submitted for the redevelopment of Glen Abbey Golf Course. I have reviewed the staff report in detail and specifically want to draw your attention to a few of the findings that reflect our specific concerns with this proposal. Our residents recognize the highly value of the associative context of Glen Abbey and their homes and applaud the Council's previous decision to protect this through designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. We therefore share staff's opinion that any development proposal which requires the removal of the golf course would not conserve the cultural heritage value and the heritage attributes of the cultural heritage landscape. In addition to the above, the association and our residents were not naive to the fact that intensification and redevelopment pressures that affect Oakville, the region, and the entire GTA, to put it, they know that the growth plan requires Oakville to do its part in accommodating this growth. However, that growth is to be accommodated in the appropriate locations within the town. The staff report speaks clearly to the policy context for the application, but I want to draw to the Council's attention to one very important consideration. I think Mr. Simeone pointed it out before in section 4.3 of Livable Oakville Plan. While the plan encourages intensification generally throughout the built-up area, it also recognizes that some growth and change may occur in these areas, provided the character of these areas is preserved. And that's key, the preservation of those areas. And the overall urban structure of the town is upheld. In this instance, separate and apart from the heritage designation on the property, it's a matter of scale and intensity of the proposed development that is significant concern to my residents. The proposed population density built form, including building heights that we've all discussed and heard in a great report earlier this evening, really is not capable and not to preserve the unique character of Oakville and our area. Irrespective of the heritage designation, this proposed development is not appropriate at this location and doesn't represent good land use planning. For these reasons, I strongly encourage Council to rely upon the opinions provided in the staff report and support staff's recommendation to refuse the application filed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. We appreciate your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Wendy Bodnoff.
Ms. Bodnoff, welcome back. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and Council, for this second opportunity to speak. My name is Wendy Bodnoff. I've lived in Oakville for over a quarter of a century and have never felt compelled to participate in land use planning decisions until now. First with Sawet, a lost cause and a decision I believe we will regret once its impact is felt on the established stable neighborhoods, traffic, habitat, wildlife, including endangered and at-risk species, and climate change impacts, including flooding, much of which we're experiencing in Bronte and in our parks, including the fact that the boat launch has not been opened all summer in Bronte. I shudder to think what's going to happen next year. And now Glen Abbey. I'd like to thank you, Mayor Burton and Council, for your foresight in establishing a cultural heritage landscape strategy 3 years ago, for carefully and methodically working through it, and tonight for adding cultural heritage landscape updates to the Livable Oakville official plan and creating a framework. I'd also like to thank Oakville Town staff and consultants for your expertise and all of the fine work you have done on behalf of the people of Oakville to uncover the value of and preserve Glen Abbey Golf Course, the iconic home of the Canadian Open, and first stadium-style hub-and-spoke golf course in North America, designed for a growing spectator sport. The first solo design of Jack Nicklaus, a golf legend who went on to design over 200 more. I'd also like to thank you for Mr. Barrett's excellent presentation tonight that included planning information that that is very new to me, but very important. Glen Abbey is truly the heart of Oakville and a Canadian treasure. Once it is gone forever. Please don't let that happen. An interesting parallel can be found in our neighbor to the south, Buffalo, New York. Humboldt Parkway was part of a network of 6 parks and parkways, the vision of Frederick Law Olmsted, who lived from 1822 to 1903. Olmsted is known as America's first and greatest landscape architect, and his system was the first of its kind in the nation, representing one of his largest bodies of work. For many years, stately homes in neighborhoods on Humboldt Parkway faced and viewed each other through a beautiful tree-lined park. But in 1962, the Paris-inspired park, described by some as, quote, walking through an Ansel Adams photograph, was replaced by a sunken freeway. The split neighborhood immediately fell into decline and never recovered. Today, 55 years later, they call it the biggest mistake of the 1960s. Organizations have sprung up and are working hard to restore it to its original splendor, but it is a tough road and maybe an impossible road. Please don't let that happen to Glen Abbey. What I have learned in my brief experience with land use planning in Oakville is that citizens who live in my community have, in my opinion, zero voice in planning matters, because land use planning is determined by technical criteria requiring the expertise of planners and lawyers. In the words of OMB Vice Chair Jody V. Zuidema, and I apologize for any mispronunciation, as stated in her OMB decision on the Saw-Wet development in regard to citizen participants, quote, each of these individuals were articulate and sincere. These lay witnesses implored the board to disregard the expert evidence and instead accept their evidence. The board sympathizes with these participants, but unfortunately cannot summarily dismiss the expert professional evidence, unquote. Respectfully, we don't need sympathy. We need stable, sustainable communities. That is why we depend on you, our elected officials, to represent the best interests of this town and the will of the people in our community who resoundingly do not support this development. Glen Abbey is Oakville, and Oakville is Glen Abbey. We've heard that more than once tonight. It is our identity and other nights. Tonight, I implore you to stand up to bullies, regardless of how deep their pockets are, and to do the right thing. A good deal of time and taxpayer dollars have been spent to recognize Glen Abbey as a significant cultural heritage landscape and to understand our deep connection to this world-famous landmark. Please, don't cave into bullies who would rather, as we learned yesterday, I think last night around, or yesterday afternoon by 3:33, demolish this Canadian treasure and degrade the livability of Oakville, then lose this fight. Please stick with the plan, refuse the application, and keep irreplaceable Glen Abbey Golf Course intact. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bodnoff, for your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Next delegation is Carol Deeth from Clearview Oakville Community Alliance.
Ms. Deeth, welcome back. Council looks forward to your information on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. As has been said more than once tonight, the town of Oakville has participated in good faith in the process of accepting that we must accommodate our fair share of growth in the greater Golden Horseshoe. And I am actually shocked to realize tonight that the application by Club Link would result in 1/4 of all of the growth planned for Oakville up to 2031 in this one location. We believe Glen Abbey Golf Course is essential to the future of the town's sense of place, sense of self, tourism growth, and overall success amid the inevitable changes and challenges ahead. This golf course is arguably the single most internationally known cultural site in Oakville. Nothing else in town attracts the international reach and media attention of the Canadian Open. Oakville is challenged to attract tourism and differentiate itself from other Canadian destinations. We are just one of many harbor towns, one of many quaint downtowns, one of many underground railroad sites, one of many Toronto suburbs, and one of many towns with a college. Mention Oakville, Ontario when traveling abroad and odds are that our town is unknown, but mention the Glen Abbey Golf Course and there is a much higher chance that eyes will light up and the Canadian Open in Glen Abbey be recognized as the venue once mentioned. Will the Glen Abbey Golf Course still attract tourism and economic investment once it is only a plaque and a few open spaces among residential sprawl? We do not think so. A golf course is a destination because it can be played, because it can be experienced, because one can see international greats competing there. Glen Abbey, alone among Oakville's many important landmarks and cultural treasures, brings the world to Oakville when we host such events as the Canadian Open, as mentioned previously. The world comes to Oakville, whether live streaming, watching TV, reading sports, news, attending the Open, or coming to personally experience one of Canada's most well-known golf courses. Perhaps there is a way for Oakville to capitalize even further on the Glen Abbey asset in our community. We don't know what that might look like, but we do know that once this piece of Oakville's history, shared values, and international image is gone, its potential to strengthen our community will be gone also. Please reject this application. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much for your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation. Pardon? I think, you know, it is dicey whether we'd fit it in. Ladies and gentlemen, we've arranged for this meeting to continue tomorrow at 6 p.m. here in the council chambers. And at this time, since we're too close to the stop time of council to begin another delegation, we're going to recess for the night. And we will resume, as I say, at 6 p.m. sharp right here. I look forward to seeing you all back here tomorrow.